You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host David Story. On the line, we have Jonah Furman. He is the author of a fantastic newsletter, Who Gets the Bird, on Substack.com. He was previously in labor organizing for Bernie Sanders and AOC. I've just got one more question for him, unless you have anything else that you want to talk about. If anybody wants to call in, 1-866-494-9866. Again, that is 1-866-494-9866. So, Jonah, my question is, we've been, I completely agreed with your analysis. I've always thought that, third parties are kind of silly insofar as they exist right now. Some of the conversation today has been kind of pessimistic. You do a newsletter of every week about what's going on in the labor movement today. What is the most optimistic thing or things that you're looking at as you're writing your newsletter?
And you can't say Amazon.
I can't say. I'm sorry, guys. You guys are in the spotlight right now. Amazon is the most exciting thing, but we can talk about other things too. I mean, I think two things are what I'm looking for, and I can give examples of this as I did a little bit earlier. One is strike activity, and strike activity is so important for a few reasons, but to me, it's not the reason most people think. I think the reason strike activity is so important is because the labor movement collects regular apolitical people who just have a job, right? You find yourself in this job and suddenly you're in this union situation, whether you're organizing a new union or you find there's a union at work and you're trying to navigate, how does the union set priorities and things like that. These apolitical people are transformed by strikes. I mean, you see this win or loss, right? Like going through a strike experience is something that no other political experience in our kind of U.S. vocabulary holds a candle to being on a picket line as a striking worker. And I've never been on strike myself, so I can't even speak from personal experience, but from talking to workers who 30 years ago went on a strike and changed forever how they view power, how they view their union, how they view collectivism in general. I mean, this is how political change happens, is by people experiencing things like huge strikes. So that, to me, is always really exciting, and it's always happening. I mean, it's happening at a tiny scale if you look at anything historical. So last year tied for the lowest in recorded history of strikes over 1,000 people in the U.S. So we really still are at the bottom of the barrel. We have the teacher strike wave that was really exciting for a couple years that really did represent an uptick in the past 30, 35 years, but we're really still at the bottom here, especially looking at last year's numbers. But things like, like I said earlier, I just got a notification that 800 nurses just authorized a strike in Massachusetts, 700 truck drivers in Arizona authorized a strike, teachers outside Pittsburgh just came back from a strike. We have 200 Teamster brothers and sisters in Minneapolis who are on strike. They're actually locked out now after 3 weeks. This stuff is really, why I keep looking for this, to see if one of those Teamster brothers in Minnesota is having this transformative experience, and who knows what that means for that local union, for politics in that city, in that state, and the knock-on effects that we can watch for. The other thing that I look for the most is actually, it's related to Amazon, but it's organizing in core industries. And this is something I don't think we talk about enough, right? We talk about new organizing like we want just more union members, which we do. But what we really, really want is to build density in core industries for core unions that raises standards in a competitive industry, right? So it's actually different to organize 20 workers at a nonprofit than it is to organize 20 workers in the freight industry by the Teamsters that are trying to drive up standards in that industry wide. So one of the things I look at Amazon for is it's amazing that there's this Alabama warehouse. What really matters, it matters if these workers win, of course, for these individual workers and for the labor movement as a whole. But what really matters is when we start talking about a national or regional agreement or standards that start going up for Amazon workers in general, warehouse workers in general, logistics workers in general. That's when you start talking about that's when the New York Times puts it on the front page, right? And right now it'll be in the business section. When there's a national agreement that raises the wage at Amazon, you're talking about, that's what we saw in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. The National Master Freight Agreement in the 60s covered 550,000 truck drivers under one contract. I mean, that level of industrial fight back is really what we're looking for. So when I see things like, last week a new election was filed at an aerospace manufacturer for 300 workers in Indiana from, I think it was the steel workers or the machinists. That's the stuff you like to see, right? You're like, this union is building back its power in its core industry. That's going to meaningfully drive up standards for everyone in that industry. So even, the digital media unionization wave that we're seeing is really interesting to watch, because it's going to change digital media forever. And that's going to have effects in our society because it's built density and changed an entire industry. So those are kind of the two things I look at, is strikes and industrial organizing in the sense of building density in core industries for core unions.
It's interesting, and Jacob said that was the last question, but I thought up another one when you were bringing this up, because I think it's important, and I think it's important for all of our brothers and sisters out there for something to be considering, because what we're seeing is great leaders like Cooper Caraway coming up, and what you're talking about is sectoral bargaining. Now you didn't specifically say that, but that's kind of when you say you're wanting to see these specific types of industries building that power industry wide. What do you think? Because here's the thing: when I bring up sectoral bargaining, most members, even very good members that I'm friends with, their eyes glaze over. They have no clue. But I think that's the next big push that we should be seeing, not only from the AFL-CIO, but also in our international and national unions. And what are your thoughts on that, as far as how can we open that discussion up more? Because it's definitely not happening, other than in a few radical labor leaders that I follow.
It's a great question. It's actually something I've been thinking a lot about, because there's some folks in the labor movement who are talking now about sectoral bargaining, actually in response to Proposition 22 in California, and some signs. It looks pretty good, but signs from the Biden administration that they're in conversation with Uber and gig working platforms that are talking about kind of sectoral bargaining from the wrong direction. So I think sectoral bargaining is a key conversation for us to have, but like a third party, there's kind of the good version and the dead end version. And of course, because this is all kind of symptomatic of the power of the labor movement, the version that's on the table seriously in kind of the halls of power right now is a scary version, where Uber says, okay, the sector has these rates, right? And you can have worker representatives go to the table, say, we should talk about, what should conditions look like in this industry? But if you don't have workers behind you ready to take action, you're coming to the table with nothing, right? So you can say, we want this, this, and this, and Uber says, you and what army, right? So I think sectoral bargaining is definitely the horizon. I think if you look at the U.S. labor movement, we think of it as a firm by firm, company by company bargaining scheme, and it is, but at its best, like when I talk about the National Master Freight Agreement, you approach sectoral bargaining in those conversations. So for people who don't know sectoral bargaining, just to make it clear, you have FedEx is bargaining with its employees, UPS is bargaining with its employees. Why not just have a scheme where everyone who does similar kind of work or is in a similar industry has one contract? And usually in European countries where this happens, the state has some role to play, saying bringing all the people to the table together and mediating the conversation in some way. The problem is, just like a third party here or a labor party in Western Europe, those were built out of strength. We're talking now about sectoral bargaining that would be built out of weakness. And that's actually scary to me, when you have, the industry coming to the table and the workers just not being there. They're bargaining with themselves. They're with a little help from the government, right? So they say, here's what industry standards should be. And there's no one on the other side to say, actually, that's not, that doesn't match what our workers actually care about or need.
And that doesn't match what our workers care about or need, and our workers won't accept it. That's the important thing. Like you said, if you say that's not what our workers care about or need and you're not organized, there say, well, I don't care. But if you've got people willing to go out on strike, people willing to stand up and say, no, I won't accept this, and I've got the power to say no, then that's a different scenario. David, you were saying something.
Well, I was just going to say, the reason that I bring it up and the reason that I think it's so important is because I worked in Germany for several years. And I see, and I don't care what anybody says, until you've worked in Germany and recognize the power of their labor unions and their sectorial bargaining, it is night and day difference between the power that we have. And I think if we're going to, and the reason that I brought it up is I think if we're going to start making those pushes, we need to look into France and Germany and those places where you see truck drivers actually stop in the middle of the interstate whenever they call for a strike and walk off and leave the goods sitting there. That is where you have the leverage, not just over industry, but over the entire country. Politicians take notice, industry takes notice, and they get what they want. The Yellow Vest movement is a perfect example of that in France the past year.
Right.
Yeah, totally agreed. I mean, I think the main thing is it's hard because I want people to think about worker power always has to be there. Anything you're talking about political changes or how the union should operate, it's all about worker power as a necessary component, but you also can't lose sight of the big picture sectoral bargaining type stuff, right? We need people who are capable of both thinking about we need to build shop floor power, but we also are talking about big picture political questions.
Yeah. Jonah, where can people find you?
Who Gets the Bird, just like it sounds, .substack.com. I'm also on Twitter. You can find me, Jonah Furman, Jonah like in the Bible, Furman, Furman, wherever you want to find me.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
So thanks for tuning in, folks. We appreciate your time. If you want to see what we're up to throughout the week, get our snide quips about the news of the day, then you should follow us on social media. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/The Valley Labor Report. We're on Twitter at Labor Reporters. I'm on Twitter at JacobM_AL. David is on Twitter at Radical Unionist. That's spelled RADICL Unionist. If you missed part of the show and want to go back and watch it later, you can search YouTube for the Valley Labor Report and subscribe to our channel. You can go back and watch the full show there, and we clip segments throughout the week. That way, if there's just one thing that you were interested in, you can watch that without having to watch the whole show. We do upload the program on more than 11 different podcasting apps. So, to see if we are on your listening platform of choice, you can go to thevalleylaborreport.transistor.fm/subscribe. We have a website, thevalleylaborreport.org. And if you appreciate our work and want to help us stay on the air, consider throwing us a couple dollars a month on patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. And one more thing before we get started to the show, the North Alabama DSA has a necessities drive every Saturday at the IBEW Union Hall on Clinton Avenue across from Campus 805 and Yellowhammer Brewing from 3 to 5 p.m. This Saturday and every Saturday. So bring PPE, blankets, clothes, non-perishable food items to the North Alabama DSA's Necessities Drive this Saturday and every Saturday from 3 to 5 p.m. at the IBEW Union Hall on Clinton Avenue. The donations will be sent to the Manor House.